You're listening to MinerTalk on demand exclusively on 600 ESPN El Paso. Stay up to date with MinerTalk by downloading the free 600 ESPN El Paso mobile app.
30-minute Sports Talk is live along with Alberto Reta, Zay Galindo. I'm Adrian Broadus. We're making today a little bit of a Sports Talk, Minor Talk mashup ahead of the FCS National Championship game. We'll have it for you here on 600 ESPN El Paso at the bottom of the hour. North Dakota State taking on Montana State, and that is where we are starting things off here on the program. It's a Monday afternoon here, January 6th. Our telephone number, 915-505-6009, and we are leading off the show, and I think we're going to talk the entire 30 minutes about Malachi Nelson, former five-star prospect out of the class of 2023, former USC signee and Boise State transfer. He committed to UTEP over the weekend. We heard from Pete Thamel of ESPN. Malachi Nelson made his visit to El Paso in late December, was spotted at the West Star Don Haskins Sun Bowl Invitational game for UTEP men's basketball, but now UTEP football taking a bit of headlines to start things off this week, getting the news that Malachi Nelson will be a UTEP Miner. This one was real interesting news for a lot of reasons and for a lot of people here in the area. We could talk about it right now. We're going to get some initial reactions from Zay and Alberto. We're going to also dissect this, how it really happened, and plug one of our friends, Lane Frank from Schoolyard Sports, who had a big hand in making this happen. So we'll talk all about this one right here, but let's get some initial reactions. We'll start with you, Zay. Initial reactions, UTEP landing a former five-star prospect, granted limited Division I experience, in Malachi Nelson, making it official he'll be transferring to UTEP.
Yeah, Malachi Nelson, coming out of high school, the number one overall recruit according to ESPN. That is just crazy that a former number one overall recruit is heading to UTEP. And like you said, right, he's played less than like a half of football in his whole career. He got, he didn't win the starting job at USC, sat behind Caleb Williams. He goes to Boise State hoping, a bit of an easier place to win the job, and then he loses it there, right? But now he's at UTEP. That's a big step down, right, from USC to UTEP. That's not how you expect someone's career path to go, but here we are. Malachi Nelson is a UTEP Miner, and honestly, I like it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things to pick apart from it. Obviously the current roster, to dive into the current depth chart that's at UTEP, the transfer portal window and what that looks like right now. But Alberto, just initial reactions, Malachi Nelson committing to UTEP. I know a lot of fans, I shouldn't say a lot. Some fans were pointing out the fact that he's only attempted 20 passes over 2 years, and this will mark 3 schools in 3 years for Malachi Nelson.
Yeah, he's had two different opportunities, but they're both he's had that chance stolen from him. So for him to end up at UTEP, that's huge for the program. I think that if you would have told anybody that the Scotty Walden regime would bring in a former ESPN ranked number one guy, it would be hard to believe. So this is huge for the program, and it really just shows that they're starting to make some noise on the national level.
I think they are. I feel like with the recruiting class being, a top Conference USA in the early signing period, UTEP hoped that would translate into momentum for National Signing Day. The way it's kind of split up for our listeners out there, early signing day typically deals with mid-year transfers or high school signees who are going to be out of the class of 2025, and incoming players who would be freshmen next year. The National Signing Day classes for the totality. It includes high school players, it includes junior college transfers, it includes transfer portal signees and acquisition. So when it was the early signing day on December 4th, the Miners ranked number one by all these recruiting websites. On3, Rivals, 247 for best recruiting class in Conference USA. Now, you look at the National Signing Day and how that projected to be in February. Well, things paced a little slower for the Miners. There were teams across Conference USA who were getting commitments for quarterbacks, for skill position players, and it felt like just up to this point, from the transfer portal perspective, things were a little quiet from UTEP's side. There was a lot of reports of, hey, they were hosting this player on a visit, they were going after this certain player, but things didn't really heat up until we first heard the news about UTEP being interested in Malachi Nelson. This happened mid-December with what we ended up hearing behind the scenes, and then it started to be public late December. I think Pete Thamel was the first to actually report that Malachi Nelson was on the visit here to El Paso the week of December 20th. And I think, what you can say is UTEP used the momentum that they had in early signing day, which they signed 26 of 27 high school players back in early December, and used that in leverage and discussions for some of these other players they're trying to get out of the transfer portal. Now, back in early December, we asked head coach Scotty Walden, was he satisfied with the current quarterback room? And the current quarterback room, let's talk about that for a second. It's made up of Skylar Locklear, who comes in with starting quarterback experience and has, won some games for the Miners here, especially down the stretch. Notably the Kennesaw overtime game and the New Mexico State game, on the road. They also have Cade McConnell, who is recovering from an injury that he suffered this past season in 2024, but also has 2 years of starting experience under his belt. He'll be entering that quarterback room. Of course, you have two guys that ended up being redshirt freshmen, J.P. Pickles and Shea Smith. Both of those guys had a chance to show what they could do. Both of them scored touchdowns for the Miners. And in J.P. Pickles' case, he had a chance to start a game for the Miners when it was all said and done. So those are guys who are in the mix for that quarterback job, not to mention a true freshman, an incoming freshman, I should say, in Chad Warner coming from Cibolo Steel. So, it's interesting when you look at this quarterback room, taking a step back, Zay, and understanding that the Miners had an opportunity to go into the spring with this current nucleus of 5. Did you think that this would be the 5 that they would start off spring ball with? Or did you kind of think in the back of your head they would go after a quarterback and eventually get one like they did here with Malachi Nelson?
Going into, after early signing day, I was kind of convinced that if UTEP was going to get a quarterback, it wasn't one that was really going to compete for the starting job. It was really just going to be for depth purposes, maybe a JUCO transfer, someone not really, that highly touted or that was being recruited that much, just for depth, right? Because we saw what happened last year. Cade McConnell goes down with a season-ending injury. Skylar Locklear struggles with injuries throughout the year. So you have to turn to a true freshman. I was just expecting them to go after somebody like a JUCO, right? But for them to go out and get someone like Malachi Nelson, they were really aggressive in that portal, obviously. For them to end up with a guy like that, I was not expecting that at all.
It's interesting, right? Because you just catapult up and get somebody like him. I think that the fact that they were able to go from, all right, they're going after FCS transfers here and there. They're getting junior college commits. They're getting high school guys to commit and sign to the program. And then by the way, they catapult and get a quarterback who is a former number 1 overall prospect. There's pros and cons to this, Alberto. The pros, if you're looking at this from the UTEP perspective, is the fact that everybody talked about them yesterday when the news dropped that Nelson would be headed to UTEP. Everybody was talking about this left and right. This was a huge story, not just locally, but on a national scale. Malachi Nelson, a former 5-star prospect, heading to UTEP.
You definitely had the nation's eyes on Malachi Nelson and the UTEP Miners, and as for playing time come August, well, you'll come to that problem when you get there. And I'll just remind people, this UTEP quarterback room saw a lot of different faces go under center this year for a lot of different reasons. So I think it's good that the Miners are kind of really expanding that quarterback room, because at the end of the day, you don't know what's going to happen. 2 years ago, you went down all the way to Cade McConnell in the depth chart. This year, you went all the way down to Shea Smith. You don't know what's going to happen and who's going to get an opportunity. You want to have depth at the quarterback position.
So the interesting part that you talk about with depth is I'm curious to see what happens when certain transfer portal windows open. Now, we're talking about a transfer portal window that just closed recently. It started Monday, December 9th, and it closed on December 28th. That was the cutoff time for a player to actually enter their name in the transfer portal. Not to say a player on this team or any team across college football could say, hey, I have intentions to hit the portal and not necessarily be eligible until next spring. I know it gets confusing. I know transfer portal windows are really tough to gauge. The best way I could say is college sports and college athletics is ever changing. A lot of these rules are more flexible than they are rigid, and the spring window in April is one to kind of keep in mind. This one is a 10-day window, April 16th through April 25th, and then after that, the next window that happens is the summer. So 2 more windows to really look at over this offseason in terms of transfer portal. But Zay, it's confusing in the sense that we don't know when officially some of these players can get into the portal. Not to say that one of these guys who is on this current quarterback in this current quarterback room, ends up hitting the portal when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, the transfer portal windows, they're all so confusing. And at the end of the day, a player can really just say, hey, I'm going to enter the portal as soon as this window opens. It could be 2 months ahead.
It could be mid-season.
Yeah, it could be mid-season. They can really just say, all right, I'm done. I'm not going to play for this team. I'll enter the portal when it happens, but that might not be the best business decision, right? There's a lot of things that go into, a player transferring, and we'll see what happens, right? I'd be willing to bet my life on it that I think UTEP will end up losing, one of those quarterbacks. It just doesn't make sense for all that all of them would stay in this.
6 guys?
Yeah, 6 guys, all really thinking that they have a shot to make, that too deep. I just don't believe that they'll be able to hold on to every single one of them.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Some other transfer portal names to mention from UTEP who went into the portal from this past year's team. Defensive end Kyron Duhan, cornerback A.J. Odoms, Javon Jackson, who was projected to be the starting running back next year for the Miners. You also had defensive back Amir Boyd Matthews. Don't forget about edge rusher Maurice Mo Westmoreland, who is currently seeking an extra year from a junior college season, a JUCO year. So those are guys, I guess, kind of relevant guys who've hit the portal so far for the Miners. And by the way, during the offseason, UTEP reportedly hosted multiple quarterbacks. It wasn't just Malachi Nelson that they went after. They went after, reportedly, Dartmouth's Jackson Proctor. He threw for over 1,500 passing yards at the FCS level and 13 touchdowns. Jackson Gilkey from UTSA, that was somebody else who UTEP had reportedly, offered to come in and, had an official visit with. They also pursued, reportedly, TJ Finley, who had starting quarterback experience at Texas State this past year, played for Western Kentucky, 490 passing yards, a touchdown this past season in limited, playing time here for the Hilltoppers. But the point is, Zay, Miners did their due diligence. They went after different quarterbacks, and they landed on Malachi Nelson when it was all said and done.
Yeah, and I feel like out of all those, Nelson, I'd say he probably has the highest ceiling just because, most of those guys are older. Malachi still has 3 years of eligibility, right? He has a lot of room to grow. And whether he grows here at UTEP or, he ends up entering the portal another time in his career, we'll see. However, I think that I like this aggressive approach from the staff. I like they went out and they wanted a quarterback. We'll see how everything, turns out, right? I can say I love this recruiting class, I love this and the third, but all that doesn't matter until the fall. And when UTEP is playing, games, we'll see if they win them.
Poncho checks in. The signing of quarterback Malachi Nelson is great. The question is, if UTEP goes 8-4 with a bowl win next year, does he transfer to a bigger program for a bigger paycheck? Let's be real. He's not coming here because of the weather. Alberto Zay just answered it right there. Yes, he will parlay this into a bigger role. I mean, Malachi Nelson went from USC to Boise State to now UTEP. So, yes, let's all be realistic and understand attrition happens everywhere. But when you have a prospect with this kind of caliber and who wants to bounce back in a big way, yeah, he could use this to parlay this to go elsewhere.
Yeah, it's definitely an insane tweet when you realize what this person's saying. They're saying, "Oh, Malachi Nelson is going to take this program where it hasn't gone in over 50 years, and then he's going to leave." It's like, well, you have a bowl win. It's something you haven't had in decades.
Let's be real.
Can you not appreciate that and then move forward? So, yeah, I think that, look, this is huge for the program, their ability to continuously stack big recruiting classes, big recruits like this. That's going to parlay onto the field eventually. So I'm excited for what they're building because of the recruits. They speak for themselves, and that it's hard to really fake that stuff.
Well, you said something interesting. How does this translate to the field? You say parlay this to the field. Let's talk about that next. We're going to take our first and only timeout of our abbreviated 30-minute edition of Sports Talk right now. We'll hear our traffic update from Charlie One, our only one of the program. Then when we come back, how does this impact UTEP's quarterback room in the future? And like Alberto just talked about right there, does this translate to wins? Let's talk about that and more. An abbreviated edition of Sports Talk, a little MinerTalk twist here on the program today. We'll take a timeout right now. When we come back, more on Malachi Nelson here on 600 ESPN El Paso. Final countdown, we are taking you up to the FCS National Championship. I'm Adrian Broadus. Steve will be back tomorrow. We'll have a full show tomorrow, full 3 hours. We'll talk NFL. We'll talk everything that we need to discuss here on the program, including UTEP versus New Mexico State, Battle of I-10 preview coming up tomorrow with some special guests from UTEP basketball. But right now, we're focusing this half-hour abbreviated edition of Sports Talk and Minor Talk, talking a little Malachi Nelson to UTEP and what this really means. The former five-star prospect committed to UTEP over the weekend. He went to USC out of high school, out of Los Alamitos High School. He didn't play there behind Caleb Williams. Then he transferred over to Boise State, did not play. He did not win the starting job, and as a result, he hit the portal again this offseason, found his way to UTEP, and let's talk a little bit more about this move and what it also means. Nelson threw for almost 3,000 passing yards and 35 touchdowns as a senior at Los Alamitos High School, which is coincidentally the same high school that Cade McConnell went to. Nelson won back-to-back Gatorade Player of the Year awards in Cali. He had offers from the likes of Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, and Notre Dame before he chose USC out of high school. Before Malachi Nelson, you have to look all the way back to Fred Rouse as the last time you could talk about, quote, the most decorated player and recruit in UTEP history, end quote. Don't forget about Fred Rouse. He was an All-American high school receiver out of Tallahassee, Florida. He was ranked a 5-star recruit by Rivals in 2005. He was considered the number one receiver in his class, a top 10 overall prospect, and he actually told ESPN during his high school recruiting that he felt that he could go immediately to the NFL. Now, it never really worked out for Fred Rouse. He ended up kind of being a bust. He went to Florida State upon graduating high school. Then he dealt with off-the-field issues. He found his way to join Mike Price's UTEP squad in 2006. Then he left UTEP by 2008. Never really materialized in the sport of football. So how did UTEP land Malachi Nelson? Well, a lot of different factors played into UTEP getting him, and actually want to give a big shout out to Lane Frank of Schoolyard Sports. He will have Malachi Nelson on one of his upcoming episodes. He called it episode 197 to see how they were able to make it happen. Lane Frank serves on the Goldmine Collective. He's on the advisory board for, and that is obviously the NIL that helps UTEP student athletes and sports programs across the board. So UTEP is just able to be in these discussions because of their NIL collective, like the Goldmine Collective, and I think that's huge for UTEP moving forward, that they could just sit at the same table as Malachi Nelson. But this goes further. After Malachi Nelson was recruited by UTEP, a lot of other schools started to pursue him, and a lot of money was thrown Malachi Nelson's way. ESPN's Pete Thamel reported that, Malachi Nelson took UTEP and chose UTEP over a lot more money in other schools. What does that say, Alberto, about UTEP and Scotty Walden knowing that Malachi Nelson chose UTEP, a bit of a discount to stay in El Paso, and Pete Thamel reported that Malachi Nelson had offers at bigger schools and for a lot more money.
Yeah, so that tells me a few things. First and foremost, it tells me that the Miners, well, they can hang recruiting-wise now with the NIL. You don't bring in Malachi Nelson if you don't have a little something at the plate. So that's one thing that is apparent to me. And also, they probably made another assumption. They made a promise to him that didn't include money, something else. So maybe that's what ended up closing the deal and getting him here. It's something that is not money but was promised to him. And that's what closed the deal for him.
So whether or not the promise happened is definitely up for debate and speculation. But Zay, let's read between the lines here and say, hey, maybe if Malachi Nelson was promised a consideration for that starting role, he'll go up against Skylar Locklear, Cade McConnell, who won't be available until early summer, late spring, I should say, from that recovery that he's going through, Shea Smith and JP Pickles, who are still young. So that's the quarterback battle and competition that we're looking at right now at UTEP, realistically.
Yeah, and, I just want to go back to the promise thing. Like, I'm just thinking in my head, like, what is the funniest promise they could have made to Malachi Nelson? Like, unlimited Chicos Tacos? Like,
yes.
The FitFam account password and user,
I
like,
love
he can
it.
control that account. Like, I'm just
love
thinking
it.
of
the FitFam
funniest,
password.
The funniest outcomes. But, yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, right? Because I feel like when you bring a guy like Malachi Nelson, 5-star, number 1 overall, this, that, and the third, right? If he, they're going to have to say, hey, it's still an open quarterback battle, but deep down, do they know that it's got to be Malachi, whether he's good or not? Like, what kind of message would that send to the fans?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's a former number 1 recruit. And I think the easiest defense, as Walden said, right before or during the, I should say, like the early signing day and all that kind of stuff, he was saying there that this team right here did not necessarily, they wanted to make all positions open for battle and all open competition. They were looking for all positions in the transfer portal. So, yeah, when you go back to those kind of quotes, you can really see and kind of read between the lines. Alberto, let's skip this break right here. We'll go directly to the bottom of the hour, and we'll hit the FCS National Championship right at the bottom of the hour here as we continue here on the program. Couple other tweets and posts to get to today. This is coming in from Herman Flores at Herman F98GFA. Is this Jamil Showers 2.0? Well, Jamil Showers took UTEP to a bowl game. Let's not forget that, right?
He did. He did take UTEP to a bowl game, and they didn't win it. Jamil Showers, I mean, I don't know. I've never seen Malachi Nelson actually play. Really nobody has in college.
Right.
So I don't think they'd be similar, but I guess when it comes to status-wise, former Texas A&M, loses his job to Johnny Manziel, ends up at UTEP. Sort of like that.
Could see some similarities. Jaden Daniels is kind of like how his body is built. Malachi Nelson, he's tall and skinny, but he can move. He's athletic and he can move. Clearwater at Clearwater Win. This is fantastic. Wealthy folks have many options to spend their money, and I'm glad that people spend it on UTEP athletics. So that's coming from Clearwater. Picks up is what he says. This is from Pinky. Have been getting messages and phone calls from various military acquaintances, friends, family members about the announcement of Malachi signing with UTEP. Surprised to get messages from college fans I know. Yeah, I had a lot of those as well. I think people are, on a national scale, Pinky, are starting to take notice about UTEP getting Malachi Nelson when it's all said and done. They have more work to do. That's the other thing. I'll close it off by saying that. They need a new starting running back. They need experience on their offensive line. UTEP needs to replace starters on defense. They're in the market for defensive linemen, DBs, linebackers, and based on some recent offers and on social media, they might be even looking for some specialists as well. So, final recruiting thoughts, Zay, as UTEP heads into the final stretch here before National Signing Day, which is the first week of February.
I'll be the first to say I thought that the beginning of their transfer portal class was a little bit underwhelming. But after this big news, right, it's hard to really mess up after this unless they really don't pick up anybody, or the ones that they do pick up are subpar, in my opinion. I think UTEP wins this offseason once again.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those things where the Miners will have a chance to use this success and leverage more success here in the transfer portal with other names that they're going after. But that's going to do it for us here today, guys. For Alberto Reta, for Zay Galindo, I'm Adrian Broadus. Coming up next, it's the FCS National Championship game, North Dakota State taking on Montana State. That's coming up right here on 600 ESPN El Paso. We'll be back in action tomorrow for 3 hours of sports talk here tomorrow on the show.